Happy Sunday, everyone. It's Hocking here again at our 11 a.m. message moments. It's great to have this moment online with you. Last week we opened Nehemiah and D. Kaylock unpacked some of chapters 1 and 2, just looking at the life and character and posture and favour that Nehemiah held as a cupbearer of the king. And so today, if you've got your Bibles and if you've got your devices, whatever you choose, let's open to Nehemiah chapter 3. And chapter 3 is a rather unusual chapter because it's showing us a people that are putting their strength into a project that God has sent under the leadership of Nehemiah. In a sense, chapter 3 starts like a massive roll call. Every name and every section of the wall is being covered in great detail. And there's this phrase that continues to show up in chapter 3, the name of someone and who's next to them. The name of someone and who's next to them. And this is just such a picture of what it is when we get involved with the things that God invites us into. He wants a community that has names of people that show up and also who's standing next to them, because a community is only a community if there's someone next to you. And so as we read through chapter 3, we see how important it is that we know the names and we know the names of the people that are next to each other, because a focused community repairing anything that has gaps, restoring anything that the Lord is wanting to restore, will have each section covered, because he's said that there will be a body that has every part at work. And so we see here in chapter 3 the names of people, and also we see their positions. In chapter 3 verse 5, however, we see that humans will be humans no matter what project we're working on. So in chapter 3 verse 5 it says, "Next to them the Tekoites repaired, but nobles would not stoop to serve the Lord." Verse 5 says that there were some people, the nobles, who would not stoop to serve their Lord. They did not support this work, and they would not put their strength or their shoulders to the work under the supervision of Nehemiah. So even though there is a community that is working on a project that God has ordained, there will be, because of our human condition, some who will not join in and participate. And so this is just such a great picture and a great reminder for us how to be praying, that as a community rallies towards doing something together, kind of like what we're experiencing now, there will be some people who will resist that. And in this particular chapter, we're seeing in verse 5, it was the nobles. It was those that had positions of influence, and they probably were going to have something to lose if they joined in this work. So, for example, they would rather see themselves as someone that would serve at their neighbour's expense rather than their neighbour's success. And for me, it just reminds me that we are in a position even now where there is so much movement and opinions, where people want to be doing certain things and others don't. And so whatever place we find ourselves in, the human condition will lead us towards some that will not want to have success unless they are the ones that are benefiting. So today I want to remind us that community is our strength, and we know that in the natural, but we also know that spiritually. We know that because we are not called to say, "My Father in heaven." Jesus taught us to pray, "Our Father in heaven," because we are members together of one body, and we are members of his great plan, and we then have the privilege and responsibility to help build what he's building. And when I say that we have the responsibility, it doesn't mean that our responsibility towards community means that we take responsibility to pay for everybody's bills and we suffer. It's actually a responsibility that, like Dee was talking about last week, and in the life of Nehemiah, we see if you are moved by compassion, to follow the Lord into what he's calling you to do in any given situation, that is taking responsibility for what God is showing you to do. And so today, as we cry out, Our Father, we pray that our community will all rally together towards the things that God's wanting to see for Melbourne and for Victoria at this time. And so we see Nehemiah, and he's initiated and invited others to join into this great project that God's given him. And the first thing, the foundation of where we want to start today, is where Dee left off, that even though Nehemiah was afraid as he was before the king receiving the permission and the resources to come and do this great work, even though he was afraid, he also was told, do not be afraid. And throughout Nehemiah, we are going to see not only things that he had to do, but the first thing that was at hand was that he had to not be afraid. So at times we're told to do things, and very often partnered with that is that do not be afraid while you do it. So our very first thing that we learn from Nehemiah is do not be afraid. Do not be like others that are afraid. Follow the Lord into what you're doing. And as Dee said last week, do it afraid. So the second thing that we're building on, so do not do what others do. Do not be afraid. The second thing that we're reading in Nehemiah 4, if you want to turn over to that, is this second opportunity that we can take at hand to do something. Nehemiah is a person that took opportunity to do something, and then he kept doing it. He kept doing it even though others were stopping him. And so there will be moments once we have got past the fear, where we're stepping into what God has asked us to do. We're standing in our position and our place, knowing the section of the wall we're to work on, and there will be opposition to that. If you look at chapter 4, the opposition came in taunts, and came in mockery, and came in intimidation. And in chapter 4, we even see them saying, that wall isn't even strong enough to hold a fox if it walked on it. Like, they were ridiculous taunts and mockery that the enemies were bringing. But Nehemiah knew what he had to do. And Nehemiah knew just to keep going, no matter what was being said by these rascals and these enemies that were trying to stop him from working. So when God has given you something to do, there will be opposition, and there will be enemies who don't like seeing what you're doing, and they will try to stop you. And we know that, we've experienced that, but I'm just reminding you, and if you want to read in chapter 4, verse 8, this is what it says in Nehemiah. They all made plans to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to throw us into confusion. Verse 9, but we prayed to our God, and we guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. So their response to this opposition was prayer. Their response to this confusion was prayer and to protect. Pray and protect. So as we stand in a place of receiving opposition for the things that we're doing in the Lord's name, we see that our response is to pray and to protect each other. Nehemiah 4, verse 14, if you want to just flick down to that, it says, then as I looked over the situation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people, and I said to them, here it is again, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord, who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah's wisdom at this time was fight for your families. So when there's opposition, when we feel like there's no more strength left in us to continue and we're being discouraged, the first opportunity we have is don't be afraid. The second opportunity is do this and don't stop. And so we see in the life of Nehemiah that he's calling people in their places, in the sections of their walls, to pray and protect and fight for their families and for their homes. And this was a very literal thing that they were fighting for, but spiritually we are in the same fight, that we are fighting again for the health of our families and for the health of our households. This last week I was speaking to a mum of 3, and of course with all the home learning that's going on, it's very intense for a lot of families. And she was saying to me, I feel like I'm just in survival mode and I can't do any more than just get through the day with my kids. And she was sharing how it was in her home, and she said, I feel like all I need to do is make sure my family is okay. All I need to do is make sure my kids are okay. They miss their friends, but I just need to make sure that the situation I've got, that I will be looking after my family. And I just, on the phone, punched my hand in the air and said, you've got it. That's your one thing. During this time, your one thing is to fight for your family, to keep your family safe, to keep your family strong, and to keep your family not only surviving, but thriving. The one thing she's got to do, she found it. And she knew all she needed to do then was this one thing during this season: fight for her family, make sure they're all well and healthy and doing well. So there is one thing that you will be called to do during COVID. And it might be that you have a number of things, but there'll be one particular thing like Nehemiah had, that in response to this crisis, there'll be one section of gap that the Lord wants you to stand in, and is inviting you to take your place. He knows your name and he knows what's in front of you. And he's asking you and inviting us to be next to each other, standing shoulder to shoulder as we see restoration coming. Pray and build and protect your families and your homes and your community. So that second opportunity, it was something, do something, and then keep going, just like Nehemiah. If we skip over to chapter 5, we also see that Nehemiah finds people who were not being cared for. And in his role of leadership, he then saw that there was no food getting to the poor, that the poor were actually being oppressed. And once again, these nobles who were in position, serving themselves and not the bigger picture of community, they were prospering for themselves. Nehemiah saw that, and under the leadership of God and the wisdom of God, not being afraid, doing something, Nehemiah stepped in as governor. And in chapter 5, we see that through his generosity, that Nehemiah actually made a greater effect for the community by changing things for those who were poor, so that they once again had food and had all they needed. The generosity and the leadership of Nehemiah was moved through compassion of what he saw. He did something, and he did something that was different to what others were doing. So on to chapter 6. If we quickly skip through, we see all of a sudden there's a conspiracy against Nehemiah. Not only was there discouragement coming through these rascals who were enemies, but there was also a conspiracy. And a conspiracy, as we know, is simply false information. It's lies. It's something that's wanting to distract us from the truth. It's false claims. And so Nehemiah was the subject of a conspiracy. People were coming and building a story about him that was not true. They were plotting against him and against the work that he had been called to do. And so in chapter 6, let's start at verse 8, we see what Nehemiah is experiencing. Under all those taunts, in verse 8 it says, "Then I sent to him, saying, no such things as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out of your own mind." That's what conspiracies are. People are inventing conspiracies out of their own mind. Verse 9, chapter 6, verse 9, we see the wisdom of Nehemiah and we see the foundation, do not fear. Verse 9, "For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking that their hands will drop from their work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. Verse 9 is an epic prayer, but also an epic response from a man who is under the favor of God and under the favor of the king and is doing a great work. Verse 9, there are so many translations that says that they were trying to intimidate. They were trying to get them to finish the work, not finish the work, give up finishing the work. They were there to frighten them, to intimidate, and to discourage them from doing the work that was in front of them. And they did not want this group of people to succeed. The prayer that came from all that intimidation and that mockery and that taunting, the prayer was so simple. The prayer was, God, make me strong. Strengthen me, strengthen my hands. Today, in the midst of all the conspiracy theories, we need simple prayers. We need prayers like Nehemiah to say, God, just make me strong. God, make us strong, strengthen us, make me strong. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. God is present to strengthen you. No matter what conspiracy is being broadcast at this time, whatever you are seeing that does not match up to the truth of God's perspective and view of our situation, we know simple prayers. God, strengthen us to remain at the work that you've called us to do. Strengthen us to stand together at this time under your truth and under your view. And so we are looking at Nehemiah, who was told not to do something, don't be afraid. And then he was told to do something and to keep doing that, even under conspiracy theories, keep doing what you've been told to do. And then the third opportunity that Nehemiah shows us that we have when we are under the favor of God, when we are cupbearers to the king, is that we have an opportunity to be informed and transformed. You see, many Christians right now are more formed by the 24 hours of news cycle than they are by the truth of the scriptures. And we're seeing many Christians whose affections are being torn and pulled towards false news. And we're seeing that they are being informed and formed, quite literally discipled, by a source that is other than God and that is other than truth. And it's this news cycle that continues to try to disciple us into fear. And so my question today, through looking at Nehemiah's life, is who is informing you? Who is your source? Do you know the source of all that you are receiving and all that you are being discipled by? Because Jesus is our greatest discipler. Who's transforming you? Who's discipling you? In Nehemiah chapter 6, we see that this is really important, that we know who the source is. Nehemiah chapter 6 verse 13, we understand here that Nehemiah is given a clarity moment of seeing that prophets that are coming to bring a message are coming not sent by God, but sent by someone else. Let's have a look in verse 13. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid. This purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in sin, so that they would give me a bad name, in order that they would taunt me. So we looked at what it's like to not do something, to not be afraid. We looked at the second opportunity that Nehemiah shows us of doing something and keep going no matter what. We looked at that third opportunity of being informed and transformed. And then we looked at this last opportunity that Nehemiah shows us to be different than those around us because of the hope that we have within us. So as you pray and build and protect the section of the wall, the gap that's in front of you that you're building into under the favor of the King, As you close the gaps this week through your prayer, through your activity of protection, whether it's through your household or a wider influence. As you go into this week, may you know the strength of the Lord as you pray, God, strengthen my hand.